Today we are delighted to have with us prominent bankruptcy attorney Richard Croak, who before having his own practice was a bankruptcy attorney for the Justice Department of the United States of America. Richard, it is so great to have you with us again.
Nice to be here, Joe. You're the best.
Well, thank you, and you are as well. And we'll find out during the show, for people who didn't see a show you did about a year and a half ago, what a mystic, economic mystic you are.
Not so much mystic as problematic, I guess.
For folks who are not familiar with the term bankruptcy, they hear the word, but they may not know what bankruptcy, or I guess insolvency would be a synonym. What exactly does it mean to become bankrupt?
Well, to be bankrupt is sort of a generic term. It doesn't really mean anything, but bankruptcy in this country means that you filed a petition in a bankruptcy court of the United States. Bankruptcy courts are federal courts. They're run by the federal government, and they do equity. They try to make as many people whole in a disaster as possible. So if you file your petition, the bankruptcy court will appoint a trustee to look over what happened and not criticize you or demean you, but try to get you back on your feet. Most people in this country file what's called a liquidation, but the average person doesn't liquidate anything. They just file the petition and they lose their debts, not their property, because of exemptions. But a lot of people file what they call reorganizations. And I think the topic this morning is really more about reorganizations, because if you file that, you can restructure your debt. Right now, you can't restructure your first home mortgage, but sometimes you can restructure your second home mortgage. So those individuals who file for a reorganization are able to restructure their debt and go forward. And that's the whole point. General Motors came into bankruptcy court, restructured its debt, and is now back out there making cars.
Now, you mentioned General Motors. We have companies like Borders Books, the Tribune Company, West Bend Recycling out of Milwaukee, and incredibly states and municipalities are talking about going bankrupt. What is going on in the nation right now?
Those are all reorganizations you're talking about. What happens is they bring the debtor and the creditors together. They figure out who's got priority in the way of security on certain assets. And then they restructure the debt so that somebody at the bottom of the creditor line hopefully will get something out of the bankruptcy, maybe not all they're owed, but the company, the municipality, the state will survive and go forward now with a debt it can handle as opposed to a debt it couldn't handle.
Now, with the restructuring, when you talk about the average person on the street, what does that mean for them? What is the restructuring process?
Well, the average person files what they call a Chapter 13. That's an individual reorganization. They come in and maybe they're behind on their mortgage. They're allowed to catch up their mortgage. A lot of people have done these mortgage modifications. And we used to say when they first started out, about 8% got the modification. But that 8% actually got what they called a temporary modification. It was supposed to last 3 months. Sometimes they lasted up to a year. At the end of that time, those homeowners were presented with a bill for the missed amount of the payment. That's the difference between what they should have been paying and what they were. Those individuals come in, they file a Chapter 13. We take that big lump sum that the bank is demanding all at once and spread it out over 60 months. The homeowner then can make his regular monthly mortgage payment and the amount in between. Hopefully there'll be some more teeth put into the government's modification program so that at some point you'll be able to take the whole mortgage and restructure it in the Chapter 13. Right now there's a rule that prevents you from doing that.
Now, with the unemployment rate continuing to rise in the nation a little bit, or not get any better, you have in this restructuring an assumption that someone will have money to put towards their house that they might not be able to meet the full mortgage payment on. What happens to those people and the debt they own? Do they eventually leave their house? And what about their credit card debt, the money they owe on their cars? Are all of their possessions taken away?
Well, in a restructuring, None of the processions are going to be taken away. The only thing that would happen is that you might have to pay the equity above your exemptions in the property. The exemptions are pretty liberal in the country right now, so there's usually no payment there. What happens now in the restructuring is the unsecured debt usually gets wiped away, and hopefully with all of that gone, you can make the regular monthly mortgage payment. Sadly, it doesn't work all the time, and sadly, some people are going to have to leave their houses. But sometimes we're able to take a house that's got 2 or 3 mortgages on it, remove all but the first mortgage, remove all the credit card debt, and what the homeowner's left with is now a payment that they can meet, and at least not all of the creditors have lost their money.
Now, we hear about not-for-profits, and people are turning more and more to the not-for-profits for support. At the same time, because of the high unemployment in the nation and the precarious economic situation we have in the country right now, there is less and less money going into the not-for-profits. And I know of not-for-profits that help people who are victims of the economy, bankruptcy, job loss, are having to lay off people. What happens to those who end up unable because of unemployment and their unemployment insurance running out, can't make any payments and are basically broke? Where do they go in today's society?
Well, I don't have a good answer for that question, but I do know that if you use a little skill, you can usually hold off the wolf from the door for much longer than you think. If you file that Chapter 13, or even if you don't.
What is Chapter 13?
Chapter 13 is a bankruptcy reorganization for an individual. So instead of coming in and saying, take all my property and give me a release of my debt, you walk in and say, we're going to restructure all the debt. Now, usually that means we're going to get rid of all of the debt. But at least there's a hope that something might be paid to some creditors. If you're in that situation where you don't have anything, and you just can't pay the mortgage, don't pay the mortgage. You can pretty much, in this day and age, hold up that bank for a long time. What you need to do is get to your legal aid office or to an attorney and see what can we do to hold things up. Because maybe we can't keep the balls from coming down at some point, but the longer we can keep the balls in the air, the longer we can play this juggling game, the longer we have an opportunity to have the economy come back, to get that job, to get you back on your feet. And once we have that job and we think we're going to get you back on your feet, we move you into this Chapter 13 and we try to restructure that debt and come up with a payment that you can make that will keep you in your house and keep you in your car and keep you in your property.
Now, we alluded at the start of the show that you sort of, in my eyes anyway, and the eyes of the staff here, sort of an economic mystic. You were here a couple of years ago, and you saw all of this coming. And if I had made some adjustments in my IRA,
don't be sad. I didn't make those adjustments either. So,
and you knew, but you know, turning again to Mystic, where do you see us going in 2011 economically, nationally?
Well, we seem to be coming into a second dip in housing prices. Housing prices nationally seem to be slipping. They're going up in a few places, but mostly they're slipping, and they're slipping sort of at the bottom end of the market. What's happening is that foreclosures, even though they've been slowed down, are still going forward. The banks take hold of this property. What the banks have been doing is playing a game that's an old game. They hold the houses that they've taken back off the market to keep the market strong.
Right.
But at some point, that excess housing capacity has to come back into the market. What the banks are counting on is that construction of housing will not come up, and if construction of housing doesn't come up, there'll be a housing shortage of a sort, and they'll be able to put that product back into the market. What looks to be happening over the next year is that housing prices are going to keep slipping, and that's going to put more and more houses underwater. And a lot of people are making what is a rational economic choice. They're saying the house is not worth what's owed on it, and it won't be worth what's owed on it in the next 5 years. Therefore, I should walk away from the house. Hopefully, you'll be able to come back and buy a house at some point, but you won't be trying to constantly pay a house that's never going to be worth what you owe on it.
Wow. And it wouldn't make sense to try and sell the house because you would end up losing as well. I suppose it would be a tax advantage to them.
Well, that's an interesting scenario because people who go into this Making Home Affordable program of the federal government, they call it a HAMP, H-A-M-P, Home Affordability Modification Program, I think. Those individuals, if they're turned down at the end, usually get a letter saying, we will explore other alternatives with you, including short sale. So a lot of people who have assets and want to protect it from a deficiency claim, those individuals can do a short sale and walk away from the house. Now, that program also requires the banks sometimes to offer you money to do that. In other words, give you your moving expenses, give you the first month's rent in a new apartment. So that's an option for people. So if you think you're going to be in that situation, definitely apply for the modification, go through the whole program, and when you get the letter at the end, then explore the short sale.
Is there any thing that you would just like to say to our viewers to get them through this tough economic time?
Yeah, if you're having problems with paying that mortgage, you need to see somebody. There are a lot of programs out there that can give you guidance and advice, but try to get to a bankruptcy attorney. And if you can't find one in your local area, go on the web and just look up bankruptcy attorneys. There'll be plenty there for you.
And also, too, you can find out the credibility of that particular person, what, for the Better Business Bureau, right?
Both the National Association of Consumer Bankruptcy Attorneys have lists, and the American Bankruptcy Institute certifies bankruptcy attorneys.